Welcome or welcome back to Trail and Ultra Running Training. My name is Will France, and if you enjoyed this podcast, I'd really appreciate if you share it with somebody or subscribe or any of the things that seem to help the spread. We've all heard the spiel 1,000 times, so if you could do one of those things, I'd really appreciate it. Today, I would love to talk about 5 traits that are common amongst good athletes. And that can be the best guy in the neighborhood or best like the elite runners or whatever, however we want to consider that. But these traits tend to be very common amongst those that do very well in their sphere. But first, I just want to say I took a little over a week off. It's a couple weeks. I took about a week off from running. I took a couple weeks off from like podcasts and social media. And some of that was largely spurred by me getting sick last Friday, so like 10 days ago. And I don't know what it was. Didn't feel great. Mild fever. Definitely had some like asthma resurgence that is like coming under control. But everything is fine. I just needed to take a like slight back off pause, partially as a result of getting sick, because I kind of sounded like this for a very long time. So it didn't create great great speaking. It was all I could really do to speak at my job and coach people. And I also just needed a pause. Sometimes we just need a break. And sometimes a week off can prevent a month or multiple months off. This is true of life. It is true of training. And if you need someone to say this to you, you are allowed to take a little time off. We hear so much about consistency, and I think it's a really good message because consistency is what is going to lead to results down the line. But we're looking for consistency in the long term, months, years. And if you're so focused on consistency that we do something like run through a stress fracture and then have to take 9 months off as a result of like trying to be hyper consistent, then this effort for short-term consistency has led you to less consistency in the long term. And that leads to lower results or fewer results or however you want to do that in the end, right? Now, there is something to be said for race day. Like all of us are going to have bad days here and there. Sometimes the weather's not cooperative. Sometimes we couldn't sleep due to whatever reason. We all have days where things just, we know they're not going to be in our favor. And sometimes it's completely out of your control. And if that happens on a race or your race day, especially if that's like your A race, then that sucks. And there's just often not much more to say to that. And you get to have the choice of whether you bail out of your A race, which you've been training for probably multiple months, or you go through with it, adjust some expectations, and see what happens. Past like month or so, people in my coaching sphere have been very, it has been a big race month. And for a couple in recent, like had a really bad, like leading into race day. One person was a local 10K and her kid got really sick and she just was up all night taking care of her kid. Um, and then recently, Brianna, she's posted about this on social media, was running Me Walk 100K. We've been training for it for a very long time. And the weather was just really bad. She has Raynaud's and the wetness and the cold just not great. So we had to adjust some race expectations and she went out there and she still killed it. Like I couldn't be prouder. But it's just sometimes things are going to conspire against you to have a bad day on race day. And as much as we like would love to control everything, we just have to use what we have and do the best we can, right? So if we look at like let's get into these like 5 ideas of what could make someone exceptionally successful as an athlete, be that professional or just the best person in your running group, right? One tends to be that they play the long game. Like, and I put out an email on this and I just wanted to expound upon it a little further because I got a few responses. So most successful athletes or people successful in any field know that we're not going to get the big goals overnight. We're not going to wake up one morning having never run and then win Western States tomorrow. It is going to take a long time of very consistent work and probably hard work to hit the target. And I mean, if we're looking at Western States, it can take a decade to even get in, much less be ready to run it. And no matter what your goals are, if we take this like long-term forever mindset, it leads to a much higher likelihood of achievement because we're not constantly disappointed if something goes wrong. If we try to run 100 miles a year after we start running, it might go well, but it's very likely that we're going to end up with injuries down the line, or at the very best, you've trained really well and running took over your entire life, which maybe that's good for you, but for most people, it's not the only thing they care about doing. So taking a forever mindset and postponing some goals, or like creating some stepwise process goals, like this is not a thing that we're going to do overnight. And recognizing that a lot of the time, if we just take a slightly longer time horizon. If we can wait a few more months or a year to hit that big target, we'll often be better prepared for it and have more fun in the process and achieve the goal a lot better than we would have if we tried to rush it, right? Another number two on the big thing is like the big things that make athletes successful is they love the training. And this is really easy tie into that forever mindset. Because if you actually love what you do on a daily basis, then you're more likely to actually do it. One of the things that tends to burn people out is they find they love this running thing and then they decide to take it more seriously and they follow some kind of rigid training plan and then the fun just goes away. And if we don't enjoy it, we're not going to do as well. And some of that's a little woo woo hippy dippy. And some of it is also just if you aren't enjoying what you're doing, you're not going to be able to put your all into it. You're not going to be able to put forth your best effort because you just kind of hate it. And if we just enjoy, or at the very least don't hate, but if we at least if we enjoy our training, we will have more success in our race because it will allow us to actually want to get out there and run. It will allow us to put in some more training sessions because we'll constantly be chomping at the bit to get out there and do something big. And yes, there will be sessions that are kind of a slog, and there's probably going to be some training mechanisms, be it mobility work or flexibility or strength training or whatever it is for you. It's not your favorite thing. But if we can recognize that these less than favorite things are helpful and they allow us to do the stuff that we really love to do, and we're still doing the stuff that we really love to do, then we're going to do really well. And if we at least enjoy it, because you're going to spend so much more time training than you are racing. Even if we're looking like a 200 miler, that's a few days out of your year. Whereas to train for a 200 miler is hours and hours and hours a week for months. And if we are making this trade-off where the training is terrible in order to do something that we really want to do, then that just doesn't make a ton of sense and it leads to worse performance. So let's train in a way that we actually enjoy, and it's not just going to lead to a happier life, which I appreciate, but it's also going to lead to better performance because you'll actually be enjoying the thing that you're out there to do. Now, another thing, number three, that tends to lead to success is being proactive and not reactive, right? Like a lot of the time, we let a problem get out of control before we do anything about it. And this is true across the board in life. And then when we get there, when we get to this like big problem target, we end up having to play weeks or months of catch up to figure out what's going on. And this happens a lot when it comes to injuries. You'll have someone who's been like feeling a bit of a niggle or a problem, and we end up having this conversation with ourselves with like, wonder what that is. And then we just let it ride for like 6 weeks. And then by the time we do something about it, we're already in chronic injury territory. If we're looking at something like a tendon thing, let's look at IT band syndrome. Your IT band is a big tendon that leaves the muscle in your hip, runs down the side of your leg, and attaches underneath your knee. And a lot of IT band syndrome is largely some level of tendinopathy. And there's many reasons for it. But if we catch it early, we can back off, adjust running form, get a little stronger to make sure that we abduct our hips a little better while we're running, and probably be back to form in like 2 to 4 weeks. Whereas if we just run through this thing because we don't want to admit that it sucks and we don't want to figure out what's going on, and we just try to like bury our head in the sand and not do anything about it, then we might be struggling with this problem for months, if not years. Like I know people who've struggled with IT band syndrome for a very long time. And if we had just taken a little bit of time early to figure out what's going on and get some treatment for it, take 2 steps back to make 3 steps forward, then we could have avoided this big problem, right? So let's always aim to be proactive. We can say the same thing when it looks to enjoying our training. If your training sucks, let's fix it early. If we are struggling with any sort of pain, let's fix that. If we feel tight or we're not recovering well, let's not dig ourselves a hole for 4 to 6 weeks and then realize that, oh, we're on the border of some level of overtraining, rather than like backing off for a week, upping our foods, getting actually focusing on sleep, resetting our life, and like getting back to it while the damage is not that bad. And this leads into number 4, which is we can view failure as a learning opportunity because we're not always going to hit our goals. We're going to have setbacks. There's going to be tough times in this road of training, as there are in everything. And when we look at like some of these goals that are really ambitious, right? Like in any distance, there will be a point where every step is further than you've ever gone before. And I think I've heard Coop talk about this, but if it's a marathon, usually we'll build up to like 18 to 22 miles in your marathon prep. And even if it's your first marathon, that's at most 8 miles farther than you went in training. And it's not that much. It's far, but it's not that much. Whereas if we're looking at like 100 miler, the furthest race you've probably run before stepping that line is like 40 or sorry, 50 or 60 miles, right? We've run a 50 miler, like a 60 or 100K, which is 62 miles. And that is 40 miles of your brain trying to process that, that you've never gone this far before and it doesn't know what's going to happen. And it's further exacerbated by the fact that it's almost always happening at night. So it's kind of a freaky environment. It's dark. You can't see super well. Things are going a little wrong. And every single step you take is farther than you've ever gone before. So we're constantly questing into this place that's new and kind of freaky. And we don't know what is going to happen in any race. And that's part of the reason that we do them. Because if we just knew the outcome, then a lot of the time it wouldn't be, we could just skip it, right? Like we'd know what would happen. We know we did the thing, we're fine. Whereas we don't know what's going to happen. And that's part of the fun, but it's also part of the struggle. And it means that it's always possible that failure is going to happen. Because, like, again, we don't have full control over race day. We don't have full control over everything. So there's a very likely possibility that something might not go to plan. An ultra marathon is a like problem solving test on the go, which is what makes them really hard. But if we do hit that failure point, if we hit that failure point in training, we hit that failure point in a race, then that sucks. It's really unpleasant, but we can learn from it and we can take that failure as a learning experience so it doesn't happen in the future. And that will allow us to be better equipped for the next time we go out and have a better experience on the next adventure. And some of that comes to number 5, which is most of the people who are successful in any field is we just do the boring work. And there's a bunch of there's a bunch of ways to put this because the boring work is different for different people. But to some degree, there will be something you don't really enjoy doing that doesn't take that long that we just kind of hate. And if we commit to doing the stuff that we kind of find boring, then we will tend to have better results. This might be figuring out your hydration. This might be planning out your how many carbs you need and punching it into a spreadsheet and just making sure that everything's good to go. This might be figuring out some level of pacing strategy. It might be flexibility, it might be stretching, it might be mobility, it might be whatever. There's something that feels kind of menial that we all know that we should do to improve performance, and they're often not the fun things to discuss. It is the pacing, it's the making sure your vest fits and isn't chafing you, it's having the extra pair of socks and like running through a checklist of items that you need in your drop bags. It's all of these things that tend to lead to a high level of success, but they're just not fun to talk about, so we often overlook them, right? But if we do the menial tasks, we will do well. Heard someone say once that the best just never don't do the basics, right? Like we just hit the solid points every time. We figure out our hydration, we plan the carbs, we make sure our sodium is good, we make sure our shoes are tied well, and make sure that we have an extra pair of socks. All of these things that are really basic to this sport that we can just overlook because they feel so menial, but they're not. And we just do them again and again and again. And these are some of the things that will make any athlete successful because aside from choosing your parents and getting better at genetics, the best things we can do are things that allow us to be consistent and allow us to train really well on a very regular basis. And that comes to keeping it fun and enjoying our training, being proactive, taking failures as learning opportunities, and just making sure that we hit these menial tasks over and over again. Hope that was helpful. I hope you have a great day. I'll be back soon with another one, and go have fun with your training.